I'm Nicola Talent, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com. So, Robin, what did you make of the sentiments coming from some of the accused, the Jason Hennessy in particular? His lawyer said that he bears no ill will towards Barry Moore. Barry Moore, of course, being the young man that was branded with a cattle iron with the word rat and beaten and sort of pretty much kidnapped and held in a shed belonging to the Hennessys some months ago.
Yeah, he was basically tortured for the best part of an hour. He was waterboarded. He was branded with a custom-made iron poker that had the word rat on it. He was driven over with an electric bike. He was beaten. He was threatened with rape. He was threatened with all sorts, that his kids would be gotten, his family's home would be burnt out. And then in court this week, in the special criminal court, you hear these sentiments of, well, you know, we're all very sorry for what we did. We're remorseful. And then the most interesting part, I thought, was Jason Hennessy's barrister saying that he bears no ill will towards Barry Moore. And it's just a weird way of putting it.
Isn't it?
I think he shoved the cattle brander into his stomach 6 times and into his head once or twice. And now he's saying he's no hard feelings towards Barry Moore for going to the Gardaí and reporting it. It's all very bizarre.
So that was Jason Hennessy that did that with the branding?
Yeah.
He's 29?
He's 29 years of age now, yeah. And
okay.
He's well known to Gardaí, and he's obviously featured heavily in the media over the last 5 years.
And Barry Moore, of course, sort of withdrew his statement, was it? Or he was due to give evidence, was he?
He was due to give evidence. So when this happened initially on February 12th last year, he went to hospital. The Gardaí were alert, and he gave a number of detailed statements outlining exactly what happened in that shed in Sheep Hill Avenue. And then over the next few months, we don't know exactly what happened. There's no way to prove it, but something happened.
Yeah.
I think even a day or two after the Hennessys and their co-accused, the Fitzsimons, appeared in court, Barry Moore was still being treated in St. James's Hospital in the burn unit, and there was kind of suspicious characters, or a suspicious character, hanging around that hospital. Kind of pictures were taken of him and sent around to different Garda stations, different groups to try to identify him, because it was a bit too coincidental that this person was acting suspiciously in a hospital where a person who was giving evidence or giving statements against serious criminals was being held. But come to kind of the end of last year, their trial was meant to get going, and Barry Moore couldn't be located. Gardaí were in contact with him, they said. They were making efforts to bring him to court to try to get him to come voluntarily, and that just wasn't happening. So they had to make the unusual step of detaining him and a warrant being issued for his arrest to appear in court. And that didn't do anything to kind of help the case. He was brought before a judge, and when the trial was starting, he just said, no, I'm not going to cooperate these proceedings. I'm not saying anything, basically.
Did you see him in court?
I didn't see him in court. I wasn't there for the actual trial itself now. I was in for the bail hearing initially last year when they were first charged. He didn't give evidence there. He was still in hospital. And I was in this week for the sentencing hearing, but I wasn't there when Barry Moore was in court himself.
So basically, he pulled out. Now, what did that mean? Because you had 3 Hennessy brothers and you had the 2 others who were charged in relation to this, some of them on heavier charges than what they actually pleaded to.
Yeah, so the only person who took a plea early was Devon Hennessy. He's the eldest brother of the Hennessys. He admitted to false imprisonment of Barry Moore, and he admitted to facilitating an organised crime gang to carry out that attack. The most severe charges obviously involved in the case. Now, that was done before any kind of indication was given that Barry Moore wouldn't give evidence. The other 4 accused waited until the trial began, and when it was clear that Barry Moore wasn't going to give evidence against them, which was the centre part of the case really, they entered pleas to lesser offences, which were accepted by the DPP, and now they're only charged with or accused of and been sentenced on Section 3 assault, which carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. It's completely different to the false imprisonment charge and the organised crime offences. The false imprisonment carries life imprisonment, so yeah, they got off lucky. And I'm not going to say you have to feel for Devon Hennessy because he's obviously been involved in a serious crime, but the evidence and the statements given by Barry Moore, he was the only person in that shed who kind of tried to de-escalate the violence. He tried to get them to calm down, to stop going so hard on him. I think he had to tell his brother Brandon Hennessy at one stage that, go easy on him or you're going to kill him.
Right.
Barry Moore said that in his own statements, and yet Devon Hennessy is now the only person who's going to, potentially
face the heavier sort of possible sentence.
Yeah.
Right. So what happened in the shed then, and who did what?
Yeah, so it all began at around 6 o'clock in the evening, 7 o'clock in the evening. Barry Moore, who was obviously known to the Hennessys and the Fitzsimons, He goes there on the pretense of buying clothes off Jason Hennessy. So he arrives at the house in Sheephill Avenue. He goes to the back garden, which has a shed. It's kind of been described as granny flat. And Jason brings him in there. And when Barrymore walks in, he also sees Brandon Hennessy, Devon Hennessy, and Kenneth Fitzsimons. He's the father of Dean Fitzsimons, the co-accused. And then allegations are made against Barrymore. They're accusing him of, passing on information to, it was tried in court as members of a rival crime gang involved in a feud. Brandon Hennessy in particular said that he told Barrymore certain information about bulletproof windows in their home, which he essentially gave him false information.
Right.
He said it wasn't true, and it was kind of a test to see if that would be fed back to that rival gang, and it was. So,
and that's a classic thing that criminals do in organised crime, and maybe we do it in the real world as well. If you're worried that information has been passed on, you feed a piece of false information into the system, and if it comes back to you, you know exactly who was fed it in the first place and that it has been passed on.
Yeah, like I think the Colleen Rooney tactic is the most famous.
Yes.
Not linked to crime, obviously,
Yeah.
but kind of a way to weed out who's talking. Now, it's never been established if Barrymore actually was feeding information back, but the Hennessys decided he was. And
right.
over the next hour, then he was subjected to absolutely horrendous torture. I think Jason Hennessy gave him a few slaps, gave him a few punches to the head. Barrymore said in a statement that Brandon Hennessy came into the shed like a madman and started beating him all over the body. He picked up a steel breaker bar. It's like a 5-foot metal pole.
Is he the youngest, Brandon?
Brandon's the youngest, yeah. He'd be 24 now.
Right.
He would have obviously been a year younger when this happened, just under a year ago. He started beating him over the head and over the body with the metal bar. Kenneth Fitzsimons then got involved and started hitting him over the head with an axe. And then his son, Dean Fitzsimons, he wasn't there initially when it started, but he came on the scene a few minutes after. And he arrived in a Suron bike, it's like an electrical bike. He ran over Barrymore and he said, "I've been waiting for you," and then proceeded to just absolutely, lash into him with blows all over the body. So that was the initial part of assault, and it only got worse when Jason Hennessy. The evidence was that he had this custom iron poker with the word "rat" on it. That was kind of heated up on a stove, and Jason Hennessy kind of made the comments of, he'll talk after this and he'll let us know what we want to know.
Right.
That heated for a few minutes. While that was heating up, Dean Fitzsimons got a towel. He held it over Barrymore's head and then poured water over it, which of course is waterboarding. So serious torture techniques.
Horrific.
Being used,
Yeah.
The assault continued, and then Jason Hennessy produced this cattle marker and he shoved it into Barrymore's torso about 5 or 6 times, and then later on put it onto his head. And I think the Sunday World printed images at the time, not identifying Barrymore, but showing the serious injuries caused, and you can see clearly on his forehead and across his body that word "rat." It's heavily imprinted on him from that cattle marker.
Dear God. And did they let him go eventually?
They did, yeah. The assault, I think it was hard for him to tell exactly how long it went on for, but around an hour was the estimate given. And at the end, he was let go after about an hour. They gave him a few more digs. They threatened him. They said that Jason Hennessy in particular made reference to, "I know where your family live. I'm going to burn your dad's house down."
Right.
Brandon Hennessy, there was a threat made to rape Barrymore with sticks. And comments were made of, "We know where your kids are, we'll get them and we'll get your kids around to watch." I think Dean Fitzsimons made that particular comment. And then at the end, it was kind of decided, right, he had enough, and they let him go, and off he went, and that's how this big.
And they let him go, of course, because they want him to go back into the community, to tell the tale, don't they? Because that's what spreads the fear.
Yeah, and it's arrogance on their part, that they thought they'd bring him to a shed, a granny flat in their own back garden, where they live, where their families live.
Now, this is the house, the original Hennessy family home. We're going to talk about their father in a minute, but this is the original Hennessy family home.
Yeah, that's where they've lived now for the last 20 odd years or more.
That's owned by the council, you know that?
I do.
Yeah.
You've reported that before.
There's
kind of issues there as well.
Well, there's not strong enough issues because they seem to be still in it.
Yeah.
I find it extraordinary that, the council are still sitting back and allowing that kind of thing happen in a house that is state-owned, when there is a situation that there's plenty of people, I'm sure, would really appreciate having a roof and 4 walls, that are in a homeless situation or not, people on housing lists or whatever. That's an aside, really, but it's still something that's there. And do we leave all this to the police, or do you kind of, use a multi-pronged attack on a grouping like the Hennessys? Okay, they're in jail now, but they still seem to be filtering that fear into the community And I mean, that message today, during that sentence hearing that that was read by his lawyer, that he doesn't bear any ill will against Moore, can be seen as nothing but, I would have thought, another threat.
Yeah, kind of veiled threat that, from his point of view, we'll leave it there and we'll say no more of it.
Yeah.
And, he's pleaded guilty to assaulting him. The evidence is accepted on the full facts basis that he subjected him with 4 other men to prolonged torture. And it's another veiled threat of saying, look, you've nothing to worry about now.
Now, in many ways, at the same time, it's the undoing of the Hennessys, but, and getting them into jail is going to give a little bit of calm in the community, because they had gone completely out of control. They mentioned themselves in their mitigation that they want the judges to consider what happened their own father in Blanchardstown on Christmas Eve 2023. They were there with their father, Jason Hennessy Sr., having a celebration, and in came a gunman, and Jason Hennessy was shot dead. Jason Hennessy Sr. in front of them, plus all the other diners who didn't react the way they did, or in actual fact, kidnap a guy many months later and say that it was to do with the trauma of this. There was ordinary people sitting in that restaurant. There was people who lost their jobs. I think that business closed down, etc. So there was a huge effect on it. But what happened there, and which of those defendants from this case were involved in overcoming the gunman?
So that was on Christmas Eve in 2023. There was an excess of 20 associates of that Hennessy family in that gang having a meal in the steakhouse.
It's a Christmas party, was it?
Christmas party, yeah. A slap-up meal for all of them to kind of get together and celebrate the year, celebrate Christmas with their families the next day. They're there for about half an hour, 45 minutes, I think we're calling it, and sitting down. And then 2 gunmen burst in, masked men. They start opening fire. One of them starts opening fire, who we know now is Tristan Sherry. He opens fire on Jason Hennessy Sr. in particular, and Jason Hennessy Sr. tried to tackle him. He actually did manage to disarm him. I think he had a young child or a toddler in his arms at the time. He put the child to one side and then went over and tackled Tristan Sherry. And during that melee, he suffered gunshot wounds, and they obviously ultimately proved to be fatal about a week later.
And was Sherry going to spray them, or was he aiming at Jason Hennessy Sr.? Was that ever clear?
I don't think the initial main target, would have been Jason Hennessy Sr., but obviously when kind of efforts were made to subdue him, whatever, probably off his head and coke at the time, and being confronted, he just started pulling the trigger and shots just went everywhere.
Right.
Jason Hennessy Sr. was hit. Now, the 2 eldest sons, Devon and Jason Jr., were there at the time. They got their father up and into a car and sped him off to hospital. So they'd no hand, actor, part in what happened after.
Right.
We know now it was a violent attack on Tristan Sherry, and it was essentially a murder because people have been convicted of that. One of those who did stay at the scene was Brandon Hennessy. He's since been convicted of violent disorder, and he levelled a number of blows on Tristan Sherry's on the ground. And obviously in the immediate aftermath of a gunman coming in, there is a certain threshold to what you can do to kind of subject or to disarm him, to make sure he's no longer a threat. But what happened on Christmas Eve in 2023 went well beyond that. He was beaten over the head. He suffered a gunshot wound to the shoulder from his own weapon. He, I think, in excess of 20, 30 stab wounds. And he was subjected to an awful death. Not to excuse, obviously, what he did, but he was still murdered at that scene. And I think 2 people convicted of murder since, a number of people of violent disorder, and still people facing charges over that. So it's still an investigation that's very much ongoing. And
that's very much before the Special Criminal Court, along with all these other cases, which is why we can talk about it at all. But the 3 brothers, Jason, Brandon and Devon, all asked the court to consider the trauma they suffered after their father's death, as part of the sentencing in this. Will the Gardaí be disappointed that the DPP took the decision to take the guilty plea on the lesser charges? Like, do you need the witness to come in and give the evidence? Or is the statement enough? Can the statement that was given originally be used? It's presumably not as good evidence.
No, it can't. Like, I'd imagine the guards obviously will be disappointed. They've been going after these guys for a while, and they thought they finally had them with this evidence and this statement over this crime. Lawyers will tell you that, if a person makes a statement, they have to come to court, they have to give that evidence, they have to stand up that evidence. And what they say also has to be stress tested. Like, there is a presumption of innocence there, there's, the legal rights. And the lawyers for the Hennessys and for Fitzsimons should have a right to cross-examine that person to test exactly what they're saying.
Yeah.
Are they sure about the identification evidence? Are they sure what exactly happened? Do they stand over what they said at the time? That is a massive part of, the criminal justice system and fair trial rights. So when you don't have that, it does impinge on those fair trial rights, and it could be the subject of appeals further down the line, and probably would have been, I'd say. So there obviously will be disappointment, but if you don't have a person to stand up in court and stand over what they said, it makes it very difficult to try to get a conviction over that.
Now, on sentencing, the judges will consider a number of things. The guilty pleas will go for them, won't it? No matter how late they came in, and despite the fact that they were on lesser charges, and they will look at their previous criminal history, the severity of the offence itself. So there you have pleaded guilty to assault.
Brandon and Jason Hennessy Jr. have pleaded guilty to Section 3 assault.
Yeah.
And so have Kenneth Fitzsimons and his son Dean.
Yeah.
Which is the maximum sentence for that is 10 years. Now, Devon Hennessy obviously entered an earlier guilty plea before the statement when the evidence was taken out. So he faces up to life in prison.
Up to life.
Yeah.
But on those assault charges, which are lesser charges that they've pleaded guilty to, the judges will look at the severity of the assault.
Yeah, and in these cases, they'll start off with a headline sentence. And I think, I can't imagine, not to try impact any outcome, but I can't imagine it being anywhere but the higher end of the scale, given the nature of the injuries. Like the Garda witness, Sergeant Emma Ryan, gave evidence that Barrymore is still in pain from what happened over a year later. He's still recovering and he's still being treated for burn injuries. So it has a long lasting impact on him. Obviously the level of violence used, the intimidation used as well, the threats made, it all indicates that will be on the higher scale. The mitigation will be taken into account. As you said there, the guilty pleas, no matter how late they're entered, there's different kind of levels that we can apply to that. Like Devon Hennessy will get the most credit for entering an early guilty plea. Could be up to 25 or 50% sometimes can be discounted. It'll be less for the others because they entered it so late, but it's still a guilty plea. And the usual comments of, it saves the state, the hassle of a trial. It normally saves the injured party the hassle of coming to court, which obviously isn't the...
This was a strange case. I haven't seen one of these in a long time. I mean, it just shows really the effects that Hennessy's have had on people and their community. I always seem to think they feel to me a little bit like the Dundons.
They would be, I suppose...
terrorising their own communities.
Yeah, and still living in their own communities where they live. The Dundons, I think the Dundons were on a higher scale, just the amount of murders they were involved in that feud. I think that cost about 90.
More so their effects on their community. Yeah, they are obviously convicted of more serious offences as well, but like their communities, they were living there.
Yeah.
They were sort of terrorising people living around them, neighbours, etc. They were actually, running neighbours out of their homes so as they didn't have people living beside them. They were also grooming young kids, young boys in particular, not grooming them, threatening them, making them hold stuff for them, literally dragging them physically and making them do things with them. And the Hennessy seem to have that same feel about how they have behaved in the Blanchardstown area. Do you think they got even more? Now, of course, we saw Devon Hennessy goading the Gardaí many years ago on the series The K.
Jason Hennessy, yeah.
Jason Hennessy, was it? Jason Hennessy.
That still is around.
And I mean, that was a pretty famous scene. I mean, everybody spoke about that. How do guards go out there and do that job and being talked to like that? He's sort of, showing absolutely no fear as the Gardaí arrive. He's standing inside the gates of the property and he's basically, being really crude to the guard, really disgusting. Their father was obviously the leader of their grouping until his death. Did they get worse, do you think, in the couple of years after that?
I think so. Like that, what they did to Barrymore last year is just pure recklessness and arrogance and stupidity to do it in their own home. I think there have been indications that their father, I wouldn't say kept a leash on them, but kind of was a calming influence sometimes, or advised them and guide them rightly, and certain things are just beyond the threshold of what could be acceptable or what they can get away with. And since then, like the evidence given in court that they're emotionally traumatized from it, of course they are. They saw their father get shot dead, but it still doesn't excuse what happened. And I think he would have been seen as maybe not a calming influence, but certainly a guiding figure and advised them on certain things that they simply should and shouldn't do. And what you're saying there about that clip of Jason Hennessy inside the K, like that carried on to the courtroom for that bail hearing last year. When 5 of them were brought in, it was late at night, late on the Sunday night, and they were all very good and excited. You know, Jason Hennessy was making comments against the Garda given evidence of arrest, charge and caution, Sergeant Mark Murphy. He was making comments to the judge. He told the judge to shut up at one stage. Dean Fitzsimons was given out about a solicitor because he wasn't making fair representations, he said, on his part. There was evidence given about a burglary charge as part of his previous convictions, and he was remonstrating that he wasn't convicted of burglary. And this is all going on in front of a judge in open court. And then even this week, Jason Hennessy kind of interrupted proceedings to say he didn't feel his barrister was giving him fair representation, just, in the middle of the court sitting.
Right.
And I stood up, started shouting, and he kind of polite to the judge, Your Honour, and sorry, Judge, but it's just not normal decorum, even for people accused of serious crimes in the courtroom, to behave like that.
For sure. But I mean, almost like they behaved, it's almost like, right, the Gardaí maybe haven't got the exact result or won't have got the exact result they wanted, but they've had a good result because they've taken them all off the streets and they've put them into jail. And I imagine no matter what, they're all going to get fairly long enough sentences. What does that mean for the Hennessy gang? Do they get stronger in prison, I wonder? And when they come out, do they get a bit more sense, a bit more business savvy?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, they, in their kind of mitigation from the barristers, they've all said they want to go on and lead better lives, how they've lovely families around them, they've been through trauma, and they want to put this all behind them. They're all very remorseful at what they did to Barry.
That'd be great.
Well. Yeah, it would be great. If it actually happens now, that old chestnut, as the saying goes, it's been said plenty of times in criminal sentencing hearings. Like Jason Hennessy at the moment, the evidence was given that he's under a 23-hour lockup in jail. He's working in the kitchen, so how effective he can be in prison to try run any kind of operation, it's very unlikely.
No.
I know that there's things as phones in prisons and all that, but if that gang can operate behind bars for a significant period of time, I don't think they can. They'll be remaining in prison for a considerable period as well. You'd imagine what happens in the interim in Cordoff, and does another gang take their mantle? Obviously, there's plenty of a market out there for the drug trade. So there's plenty of people willing to step in. That will probably happen. And the kind of fear is then what happens when they come out? Will they actually go on to lead these exemplary lives as they claimed, or will they try regain control of that drug trade?
Or what are they going to come out to? You probably don't know the answer to this, but I'll ask you anyway. I don't really either, but where would you think they stand as regards OCGs? As regards money making? Were they street dealers? Were they getting anywhere, or were they just putting all their energy and time into those threats and that violence?
I think the latter. Yeah, it's hard to kind of assess it. If you compare them to the likes of the gangs that normally feature in high profile cases, they'd be well removed from that. The likes of even the Kinnans and all that, they're street level.
Yeah,
really is what they are. Like, they started off in Cordoff in that feud, the drug trade, drug and sale and supply out there. They became involved in a feud. There was over 100 incidents, in 2018-19, and they've stayed in Cordoff. So they haven't kind of escalated to any kind of higher level. There is money there, no doubt. If they're making much, though, there's no real evidence of that, significant wealth, or, they're still living in the family home, council home, as you said. So there's no kind of clear display of wealth. They're not moving to these mansions or enjoying significant holidays abroad, or even moving to Spain or moving to Dubai like more senior criminals do. So I think they will be considered a more local operation, but still highly volatile and reckless. That's why they became such a concern. It's because they're so reckless. They're involved in shootings and gun attacks in drug sale and supply, and obviously then in this incident as well kind of is testament to that.
For sure. Well, no doubt their incarceration will allow the community breathe a bit for a while, because I'd say it's been horrendous with them in the ether out there. So Robin Schiller, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola.
If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh-in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised. But the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that, do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy had, I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there, but the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on, he wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens, divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of, if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after being a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after, there's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
yes.
So he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons, and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail. But we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. His brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed because of that? They had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from the Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.